Fantastic. So got everybody's stuff picked out, and then I've also got the assignment for next week picked out. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna what we do here every week is that I give an assignment and then I give feedback on that assignment. So if you want to participate, it's free. So I'm gonna give out the assignment for next week right now, and then I'll be doing it again at the end once we've got everybody in here. But in case you're catching us on the VOD, this makes it a lot easier for sharing. So here's the piece that we're going to be studying this week. Dr. Sensible, I'm going to get you in just a minute. You are one of the people I'm reviewing. Oh, screen share. That's an excellent reminder. I'm out of practice, as you can tell. All right, there's the screen share. So I'm going to drop this in chat. I'm going to drop it in the homework too. So the idea, my grand vision for this week's assignment is that I want to expose you guys to painting some patterns. I just need to find the channel, and the Discord channel interface is just not quite there, is it? All right. So the assignment is do a study of this photo and don't skimp out all the patterns. All right, so that's an easy one. The gimmick here is like fairly simple, but because patterns are hard, and it's one of those things that like, you think there's got to be it's a beautiful photo. It's one of those things where you figure, hey, you know what? There's got to be a way to automate this, right? We got to be able to do like a texture overlay, and you can do that. It's possible to, find a similar texture, put it on an overlay layer, and maybe manipulate it, maybe squish it around a little bit, maybe make a couple of copies and chop them up. I've seen people come up with a lot of creative ways of trying to shortcut this process. But we're not here to make shortcuts. We're here to do things the hard way, because it's like going to the gym and lifting feathers is just not going to do as much as lifting heavy weights. So this is why we come here every week to go and just do something that's a little bit harder. And it's not as hard as you're worried about. The main thing, my recommendation for this week's assignment is that you get a lot of the values, you get a lot of the just paint the cloth as though it were blank, and then make a new layer and go from there. So you've got a whole study to do that's a normal study, and then you're going to try to paint around the textures, and then you're going to paint all the textures. That's the way I would do it. But there's lots of good ways to solve this. There's plenty of ways that people do this. Stevie's looking nervous. Stevie, you never do these assignments, but you're welcome to join in this week if you want to give it a shot. So if there's any questions, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, we're going to jump right into the feedback from last week's assignment. Just peeking in. Yeah, you can peek too. We've got Kimcrete is the first one up. Is Kimcrete here? I don't think so. You know what? What I'm going to do is I'm going to put Kimcrete to the back of the line really quick. And then we're going to move on. I saw Dr. Sensible was excited to jump on stage. And I'm creating your work this week, Dr. Sensible. So if you want to raise your hand again, you can come on and we can do you first. It's all good. There's not really a method to this madness. Hey, welcome to the
Hello.
stage. How's it going?
Good. Sorry for the noise. I'm walking home from the gym, speaking of lifting weights.
Yeah, you know how it goes.
Yeah. And, I got stuck in the squat rack, so I mistimed things.
It's all right. You're all good. All right. So your comment on your piece this week was, it's been a month since I've been able to participate in these. It was a fun challenge. Trying to do some new things. Got all done in a single session yesterday, minus a break for dinner. That's how I usually do these. And part of the reason I want to pull up yours this week was because you included a very nice painting process video that was linked. And so I watched, I think, about half of it. At double speed. It's at 13 minutes, a little long for me to sit down and watch the whole thing. But at double speed, I really wish I could put up the triple speed. It was good. If I was working with people one-on-one, I would be asking them to record stuff more often, because it's so insightful to get to see how people do stuff. I'm always trying to do like a visual archaeology on the final piece to try to determine how things were worked on based off of my like what I can see in the final process. So getting to see this revealed to me a couple of things that I suggestions I wanted to raise with you.
Perfect.
So number one, I noticed that when you've gone pretty far into the piece, you keep like a light background. You're starting to add tone for the skin, but you don't have you're working out a lot of the likeness. You're working on a lot of small details, but we don't really have values yet, and it makes it a lot tougher to make the three-dimensional structure of the face without
Right.
like, using our values, right? And then when you do get into the values, you tend to lay them all out with a soft brush. Can you talk to me about that a little bit? Like, what is this relationship with the soft brush about?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm used to doing is just using the same brush for my line art, my sketching, my shading, my values, everything. Keeping that side of things pretty simple. And I usually actually do work on a gray background. One of the things I was trying this time was to do it on a white background to like kind of work from my highest value and then work down. But
Okay.
I definitely hear what you're saying about having that relationship. It's definitely more natural.
Yeah. Well, what's the
Yes,
what
this is all one brush.
so it's all one brush. So even this all the softness, all the soft brush of laying out all the values was the same as the one you're doing with the details.
Yeah.
That's wild. So do you have like a soft edge brush the entire time, or like is it controlled by like the pressure sensitivity?
Yeah, so it's basically it's a soft like texture brush that if I'm using low sensitivity, it'll be pretty transparent. And then and what I tend to do is just like play with the size of the brush for my shading, back off on the pressure, and then harder pressure and smaller to get the edges and to go into darker values.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I thought you were because you've got these very fine, crispy lines for all of the wrinkles in the face. And so I was just presuming that you had like a harder edge brush for that, and that when you were laying in these larger values, like larger blocks of value, that you were doing it with like a soft brush that you were switching back and forth.
Same brush.
Yeah, okay, weird. I would recommend not using so much soft brush. Part of one of the things that stood out to me is there's this really big separation between like the fine details and then the overall like softer, larger shapes. And when you define all of the larger shapes using a soft brush, you end up with this kind of like airbrushed look. Like, and in digital, I think it can be a little weird looking. Like it looks really good when you're up close because you have all these smooth gradients and you get a lot of work done really quickly, and it's not all super flat. But then when you zoom out, you can really see like this soft brush look. And I like the soft brush as like a tool at points in the process. I was using it for a lot of my portrait work as well. But like laying in a lot of big values with that, it has this kind of spotty, like smeary look to it that is like just a hallmark of the tool. So I think sticking to one brush is good, but if you want to get a greater level of control over your values and over your edges, give a try to my default brush. You can find all my brushes over at huckleberry.art. It's a free download. Or it's like, honestly, it's the simplest thing in the world. I'm using a regular soft brush for the most part, my default brush. And then it's got a size flow on it. I don't know if you can see the screen.
Yeah.
It's got a size flow on it. So the pressure sensitivity affects the size a lot like how you're using. And then the way that I'm able to get softer or messier bits is that the flows turn down really far. So instead of messing with the
Yeah.
edge hardness on the brush, I'm turning the flow down. And the more you turn that flow down, you can turn it down to a crazy degree. You can get this kind of airbrush effect where it takes a while to kind of build up a stroke.
Yeah.
And you can see it has a fairly soft edge, except for the fact that if you're careful with it, even at a large size, it still creates like a firm edge because it is a hard edged brush. But and so if you find the right spot to dial in the flow, you can see like these when you run strokes parallel to an edge, it makes them nice and crispy. But then anytime you want to like keep things loose, like the way that it kind of fades off at the edges there. And so that allows you to get a mixture of like hard and soft edges out of a single brush without switching back and forth, which is something that seems like you're really interested in working with. I mean, I feel the same way about it. So give that a try and see how that works for you. The
Yeah, I will.
yeah, the overall like with the yeah the big problem that I saw you running into with with your process video that I was watching is like creating blocks of value to like really like build out the sculpture of the figure like to is really hard with a soft brush. um, and it's like we want to be able to early on block in those values as much as possible so that we can create a nice firm 3D base to like lay all of our stuff on top of. Because the alternative to that is that we end up with something. I'm going to create a super exaggerated version of your piece here with a filter. There's a odd filter under the other section in Photoshop called high pass. And what high pass does is it attempts to eliminate all of the soft transitions and only leave the like crispy deep fried details. And when we overlay that on top of an image, we can see what it looks like with just the details being brought up. And so I'm going to bring them up to a really extreme degree to give it that deep fried meme look. And you can see it has this flatness to it. Like there is there's a flatness to the shading, but yet we still have these like fine details. And the goal is to ultimately have a mixture of the low pass, which is the like softer sculptural, parts of the painting with fine detail integrated over the top of it. And without having the ability to control those large strokes and like the edges of them, then it's very difficult to create those low pass, big sculptural like shapes that the detail lives on top of. And so I find that a lot of times what people do is when they feel like the details just aren't hitting, the polish at the end isn't hitting, they keep turning up the high pass detail more and more and more because our eyes are really drawn to contrast and detail. And so the presumption is that you need to keep sharpening. You need to keep adding contrast, adding additional like high pass detail to it. And it leads to this like progressive flattening and crisp, like deep frying, crispening of the image. And that's not what we want to head with it. So I'm going to peel that away because I don't want your work to... you can see as I peel away that exaggeration, we can see it starts to get more 3D again. And I want to continue to see that process. Like, if we could, I would want to see that like continue to reverse even more. So we end up with like a more 3D looking portrait overall with all the fine detail you're putting onto it. Because you did a great job with the likeness. You found all like the shape of the head, the location of all the features, all these little wrinkles. You did an awesome job locating all of that. It's just that like doing all of that so early without building up a strong base underneath it is leaving you with like this place where it's very hard to build those like 3D shapes underneath the detail once it's already established like this. And so it's very difficult to push forward from this place to solve the main issues that you have with this painting. Which is why it's so great to see the process video.
I've been watching a bunch of videos on value in the last couple of weeks too, and I know that it's definitely a weak point for me in terms of like I need to live in the mids a lot more. I tend to push contrast too much, so it's good to hear that I'm not crazy and that you agree.
No, you're right. I think you probably know broadly where you're at. I wanted to point out, like, if you were to process wise, what I would do differently is experiment with a brush that isn't so soft. If you wanted to like flesh out the 3D form of a figure a little bit, it can be nice sometimes to like, if you're feeling everything's just a little flat when you're still building up the shapes of things, to like round it out a little bit with a little bit of soft brush. You can sometimes add a little form that way early on before you start carving in more detail. That's the way I typically use it. But I think that getting a firmer brush to build your values early on is going to make a difference. And I think definitely getting the overall rough value pattern established prior to going into like those fine details, the wrinkles, the beard hairs, stuff like that. And that'll also help you with your colors. Because the one other thing, not to pick on you, but the first thing that jumped out to me was I was thinking about your colors. And as you're going to try to create that really fine detail, we're getting a lot of black in the shadows. And
I did a little bit of a level adjustment at the end, and at that point I was like, it's bedtime, so I didn't push it. But that's part of the issue that I'm having with too high of a contrast, is that I'm too deep in the blacks and squashing that so that I'm not having these extreme highs and lows would help the overall picture for sure.
Yeah. This is likely a process thing rather than a philosophy thing. What were you using to add color? I didn't get a clear look at it when it was a little bit further in the process. I really like the point where you start adding color. It's looking in a pretty good state, and the colors aren't too far off. But you're being left with these really black shadows still. It looks like you're using overlay to add colors as you're blending them.
Which is a new process for me. Usually, and I think you've seen me do it before, where I create like a flats layer and I color that way. That was one of the new things that I tried, and I tend to like either put my line art and my values on like a linear burn or like soft light or something, and that softens it. I think that this kind of overdid it doing the overlay method.
Yeah, I mean the overlay, you're getting a good like response from the overlay as far as the colors that you're adding in. But the problem there is like the lines still bringing too much black. I wonder if if you like the way if you like feel like you understand overlay, if it's a good language of color for you, then like you need to figure out something to like knock those blacks into it so that they kind of mixes together. So using the putting the lines on a layer and setting it to soft light might help. That might do it. You're going to have to rebuild up a little contrast afterwards, which is fine. This is actually I say the same things every single week. Everyone's probably sick of it. This is one of the reasons why I love hard light as a coloring method, is because hard light will actually fuck with your values, which sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually a good thing, because you can see that when I take some of these colors and I hard light over these wrinkles, you can see that now they become saturated colors, because hard light will pull your values away from this flat edge with the the white to black gradient, and will pull it all towards the tip of the triangle
saturation
here. Yeah, and so it'll start to enrich in those like dark black gray values with saturation in a way that lightens them. And some people, that drives them completely nuts, because when they go to add color, they're like, but now it's destroying my values. And I'm like, no, it's supposed to. Because when you add hard light, the closer you get to grayscale, the less it affects the piece. So if you're doing like a dull orange, it's not going to like annihilate your values, because it's kind of still transparent. But it'll do this. It'll just pull things up a little bit. It'll be a little bit more gentle with it. If you do a really saturated color, it's going to completely annihilate your values and look insane. But
Right,
if something really is super saturated, if it's super bright orange, the values on that thing are going to be pushed away from whites, pushed away from blacks, and towards the middle where the saturation is able to like emerge. Because we have this like, as you get towards the saturated color, you get this condensing of color. Like you get this condensing of value range as we sort of bounce our way towards the saturated tip of the color wheel. And so like I like hard light because it keeps that like if this were traditional media, it would look like you mixing black paint on your palette to make your shadows, which is something art's going to tell you not to do.
You don't want to do.
And in digital art, it's like, okay, we're not actually literally mixing black in. So we need to figure out some method for like how do we use the blacks from our value process to like mix through a blending mode into the colors in a way that creates something that is dynamic and realistic. And there's 10 different ways to do it. And it's real.
So
I
this
really like
particular
hard
method,
light, but I'm like one of the only people that does it that way. So I can guarantee there's 9 other good ways to do it. So you should find the one that works best for your mindset.
yeah. So for this method, are you putting your line art in that layer, or are you doing this on top of the line art in a separate?
I'm putting it on
hard
top
light
of
layer?
the line art in a separate layer. So the color's
Okay.
going over the top like a glaze of oil paint that's going over the top of a sketch.
Okay, cool.
Because if you glaze like rich colored pigment over the top of a pencil sketch on a canvas, you will get this effect where the translucency of the paint will give the sketch underneath saturation. And I'm trying to emulate that as best as possible digitally, and I think that hard light replicates that. I discovered recently that apparently hard light doesn't do that in Affinity Photo, but it works. I think it works right in Procreate, CSP, Photoshop, and Krita, basically all the same, close to the same. So I don't know. That's been my solution.
That's cool, and that's what I've done with my prior method using linear burn. It does a similar thing, but that only works if I'm doing the flats thing and I was trying the overlay thing.
Yeah.
So I actually tried. You can see in the video later on, I try that, and it's like it gets blown out. So this is a cool method to do that same thing in a different way.
And linear burn's only going to go light to dark. The hard light goes both directions. So it'll go bright. It'll make things brighter as well as darker. But I need to move on because I'm running over time. Any final questions that I can
thank you.
speed run for you?
And I will. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, great. Great work this week. Awesome talking with you. All right.
Thanks, Pete. Thank you.
Next up, we got Abarth. Hey, man. All right, moving Gabriel the audience.
Hey, Pete.
Hey, Abarth, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
So your comment says, I was excited about this week's assignment, especially because I was very attracted to Richard Smith's portraits, which have a wide gamut of detail. Does he say wide gamut of detail, or is that a linguistic invention of yours?
Oh no, sorry. I just said that. Is that the wrong term?
When I think of gamut, I think of as being like a sort of 3-dimensional space. That you could like a 2-dimensional like plane, like a multi-axis like space, while I think of detail as being kind of on a linear gradient.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I used the wrong term.
I'm just curious if there's an artist smarter than me using that terminology, because it's different than what I would expect.
No, I was just thinking of like a gamut of color was like a wide range of color. So I thought.
Yes. Yes. But I think when you express a gamut, it's usually like a multi-dimensional space. While a wide gradient of detail would be how I would say it. But that, I just thought it was an interesting, smart choice of words, and I wanted to figure out if you were saying something smarter than me, or if I was smarter than you on this specific minor point. But because I was like thinking maybe there was something there for me to think on more deeply. You said I experimented with leaving the drawing visible in the clothing with several messy brushes in the background and the headdress. Couldn't figure out how to open up the detail gamut as wide as I wanted. This experience makes me want to try to find a Photoshop brush that looks like streaks from of oil paint from Schmidt's Paintings. Yeah, I love that messy oil painted look too. I've never really been able to figure out how to do it digitally. I've seen a bunch of artists pull it off. I bought a tutorial from an old friend once that how he did it, and his solution was this really elaborate multi-step process. It wasn't like a brush. It was like he was able to fake it through like this multi-step process that was just creating the artifice of it without creating the actual experience of doing messy oil painting. But yeah, you might be able to find something that works for you. The brushes that I'm seeing you use here to try to create messiness seem pretty good. But messiness is the thing that I wanted to talk with you about today. But like first, I want to ask you, like, how was your experience with the assignment?
I enjoyed the assignment quite a bit. I did want the background to be messier, so I'm interested in advice about how to make more of a mess.
Okay, great. I think you posted some work in progress shots with this, and I just failed to pull them into Photoshop along with this. I'm gonna scroll. You did, didn't you? Yeah, you did. I'm gonna pull those into Photoshop real quick also to illustrate this because I'm realizing that painting over your complete picture is not going to help with that. All right. Ooh, the same resolution. That makes things easy. Okay. So messiness. There are my thought on this is that messiness is in my method of painting, not the only correct method, but in my method, there's like two good places to add messiness. And one of them is like right here. Once you've gotten like the structure overall and you're about to dive into values, this moment is a space where there is like an unlimited amount of messiness potential available. So this is where I like to take like any like a messier brush and work in ways that are make the brush very large, maybe too large, and work in ways that are very loose and very quick. And that creates a lot of like accidental, painting outside the lines, overspray, and like instead of like I'm seeing a lot of the messiness that you're making is with the brush at about the same size that you're making these marks. And it's hard to like make things messy when you're keeping things like at this size and relying on the kind of jitter of the brush. I think what, for my money, the thing that I think makes a better messy look is to use bigger tools, use oversized tools, and just work quickly and really just try to work in a way where you don't care quite so much. And it gives you a lot of genuine accidents and genuine texture. And that messiness like is a great asset to build on top of. When you're early in the piece like this, doing less like can be more because it leaves this ambiguity for you to go and figure out exactly where are these lines supposed to be later. Once you get to the detail, once this kind of like more in-depth investigation of detail needs to happen, then you can override like the kind of you can collapse this possibility space of detail out of this like messier, looser thing. And so when you have like the silhouette of your character or the silhouette of your figure, like just totally gritty and messy, then like it gives you an opportunity later to pick out a smaller mark making tool and carve into it where it suits you. And then where it doesn't suit you, where you want to keep the mess, you're just preserving the mess that was already there from earlier. So that's one of the reasons I like making as big of a mess as possible early on. I guess there's two big reasons. One is it leaves that possibility space wide open for future resolution. And the second is that you get happy accidents that you get to utilize later in the process. And then the other place that I think is good to make a mess is all the way at the end. This is a place where you can, as a digital artist, sometimes you need to use a little bit of the artifice of like traditional painting in order to get that feel that you're looking for. And so this is where you might have seen me adding streaks by taking like a crusty brush and trying to simulate like a single brush stroke through wet paint to smear the paint. But for me, it takes 20, 30, 40 little brush strokes where I'm actually having to manually smear things around in order to get that kind of like recreate that effect manually. And so I'll do this to like expressly bust up edges so that I have some edges hard while other ones are made loose on purpose late in the process. And then I'll also use it to just sort of add texture and detail and interest wherever I feel like I need it, because it's not about being out of control. It's not about like just letting the brush do whatever it wants. It's really about trying to pick these points where you say, I would like to see this. I'd like to like wipe this out and like make it vague. I would like to add a point of interest over here. And it ends up being a very mindful process when you're doing that messiness at the end.
In the earlier stage, when you were using an oversized brush to start off with the values, is like the level of detail in the drawing where you would go, or would you have a more detailed drawing or a less detailed drawing? Or
personally, I think this level of detail in the drawing is very good. And there's another one I'm going to look at later, Amanda's piece, where she's talking about trying to find where that level of detail in the drawing is for herself, and she's landing in a similar spot. It's not like there's a correct place for it to land, but if the question is where would I go, I think you're pretty close. Because the goal for me at this stage is about structure. And if you feel like you get close enough to the structure where you can resolve the ambiguity later exactly where you want it, then you're good. But you're not so precise about it that you feel like you need to be tracing close to those contours and making sure that you don't screw it up. It's really about like the broad shapes of everything and making sure that you have this scaffolding to be able to build on top of for in these next layers as you start to like build loose value and you know start to carve in more precise details and resolve things more deeply. But like this kind of like loose sketchiness and using a sketchy brush in that process has always been an assistance to me. What was your experience like? Do you like having this sketchy line to build up from, or do you feel like you want something more precise? Uh-oh.
Sorry, I was having some connectivity issues, but I
You're back now.
I think I got what you said, so thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
I was asking though, do you like having the really sketchy line, or do you feel like, based on your experience with this piece, you want something that's more precise?
I don't think so. Like I feel like the drawing I had was useful to me, but it was sort of be counterintuitive to make more of a mess at the value stage. I sort of was feeling like I was keeping continuously refining it from that point.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it'd be interesting to try after finishing with the drawing to then start very loose and with a very large tool on the values and then refine them separately as opposed to trying to refine the values inside of the lines that I created.
Yeah, like you can always, once you take like a big loose pass at everything, you can take another second pass and then a third pass at any point that you want to. It's just that like it feels like taking a step back whenever you have already worked out a lot of refined detail and a lot of very precise lines, and then you're like just mushing over the top of it. You always feel like you're losing something. And so I feel like moving from messier to more precise is always a little easier. And some people do it by putting out big blocks of value and then kind of boiling it down to like more precise shapes. But I like these kind of loose lines as a marker for building up values. But those first like attempts at value, I love to keep those like really loose. Sometimes they're big fills to try to like cover large areas that are going to be all similar value. And then other ones end up being like trying to carve up the 3D shapes a little bit to be able to add more volume to things. And then eventually that starts descending into like refining the overall like blending between these bigger shapes and making smaller shapes and more subtlety, but keeping them really loose in those first steps and then slowly getting tighter and tighter as it goes on. I feel like it's easier to figure out like where where is too much. Because, there's some places where you're just going to feel like you want to keep that looseness. And as long as you have it in there early, then you're kind of already done for that part. It's nice. Like it's, it feels luxurious to have that like there as an option.
Yeah, a couple of times in this piece, I found myself like I'd gone too detailed with some of like the wrinkles in the face, and I was trying to paint bigger shapes on top of it, and I felt like I was spending a lot of like that was taking more time than if I'd done it in the other order.
You're right, but also sometimes you do need to do that. Sometimes you do need to glaze a little bit over the top of like once you've already gotten the precise shapes coming together. Sometimes you'll look at it and go like, "Oops, I'm starting to flatten it out a little bit," and so you need to start coming back in with some really lighter brush strokes and start to build back in. Or sometimes I will even do that same process with a blending mode. Like Soft Light is a tool that I use for building that up. Because soft light, unlike hard light, will never like completely eliminate your contrast. So if you decided that you're feeling the face was a little too flat and you wanted to round it out a little bit, you can do a little glaze with black and white on a soft light layer and start to re-sculpt some of these features a little bit without end up like overwriting your detail. So you get kind of both at the same time. And you can see how you can bring out a little bit more of a three-dimensional nature by using black and white that way. It's just that it tends to look it makes your contrast looks a little artificial and kind of too digitally and shiny. So I'll often put in as much as I think I need and then turn it down to 50%. And then I'll move to work on top of that. And the work that goes on top of that will also assist in helping to like keep that volume but make it look less artificial.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like when I like work on the detail, I end up adding too much contrast, and so this seems like a tool for at least backing that off a little bit.
Yeah, having a repertoire of tools to back it off when you need to is important. Yeah, you're right. The goal is to try to not have to back it off. The goal is to try to like nail it in one, do it a la Prima style, like Richard Schmidt would do in oils. But were we to be a genius, we wouldn't be here right now. So it's like maybe it's like nice to be able to have like a variety of tools that like help, like when you find yourself overstepping on these kind of things.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Pete. I really appreciate it.
Yes, it's great to see your progress in all this. I feel like every time you do one of these assignments, I feel like you're always showing off new things that you're learning. It's great to see.
Thank you.
All right, moving along, we've got. Did Kim Crete join us? I gotta find my way back to the live stage to see. I'm gonna push her to the end. Amanda, you're here, right? Wait, Amanda's usually here. There's Amanda.
Hello.
Hey, Amanda. I just realized I did the same thing that I did with Ebarth's homework, and I forgot to download your supplementary stuff that you posted because I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, the whips.
Yeah, the whips. The hot whips. I would say whip around other artists, and they would be like, what are you saying? What are you talking about? Like, and now I can't find your post because I'm like panicked. I'm panic scrolling, and I'm missing it. You didn't delete it on me, did you? There it is.
No, it's there.
Okay. We got that, and then I'm going to try to paste this in and see I can scale it, and then just kind of scroll through them like this. All right, so your comment said, spent a few hours on this one, kept my sketch rough because with portraits, I've been finding that less information can be more. This is something I was just talking about. I'm glad that you're coming to that conclusion. I think you're exactly right. As long as the main figures and big shapes are there, it seems to be enough. I think the face is more detailed. The most detailed one I've done in digital drawing so far. I've tried hard round brush for that, and it gave me the control I wanted over my usual pencil textured brushes. That's all super interesting. Tell me a little bit about your experience this week.
I was a week and a half ago. I did, so I'm just trying to get back into my headspace there. Yeah, it was good. I started off with a rough pencil sketch. Lots of times doing a portrait, I'll be like, oh, okay, let's really get those eyes in there and the nostrils. And now I'm just like, no, the eyes are roughly here. Here's where the bottom of the nose is, the lips. I'm like, cool, that's enough. Blocked into colors. And then I was just trying to keep in mind of the large shapes and where light would fall on them and create shadows, and then started to detail it. So I'm trying to figure out like how the smoothest way to get it to a finished place.
Yeah, because like your initial sketch here doesn't strike me as being particularly close. It's like when we're talking about likeness, it's like it doesn't look like a simplified or blurry or desaturated version of this image. And yet you've captured really important information here. You've got the structure in there so that like you can use this as a tool to get to the likeness in the later steps, which is excellent because it's so much more efficient than like having to repaint everything over and over again. So like loose block in of flats to just lay in a base to create context. And then,
like here I was able to tell like, oh, his face was too narrow. So just with getting some color and just like making it a little bit wider is much easier for me than sketching it back in.
Exactly. And then when you commit to like a really hard line and really precise line at the beginning, and then you're like, wait a minute, his face needs to be wider. You could liquefy it. You could transform it. You could erase it and redraw it. But if you want to work fast and you want to work efficient, maybe just paint a little wider on the next step. It's like just keep it looser. And then as we move through it, we're going to be collapsing that space. And so now at this stage, we're getting a version of the image that feels a lot more like the photo without a lot of detail. There's almost no detail in here at all. And yet the extreme messiness of all of this, in some places, is probably appropriate level of finish for this assignment. Like aside from the face, which you've foregone to the end, the part where you're going to get the deepest in the detail on, you've just, put your favorite dish aside to be eaten last.
Yep.
And so you end up with you have the results of your virtue here is that you end up with a really strong study that probably came together a lot easier than some of the ones you've done in the past.
100%. It was breaking it down this way it started making more sense to me than agonizing over every little detail of his face in the sketch.
Right. Yes.
Where I'm like, I'll get to it kind of thing. I'll get to it later and I can push and pull the really rough shapes. And then when I'm certain where they are, I can detail them.
Yeah. And it just feels so much better than like being like carefully sculpting these little sandcastles and then smushing over them by accident as you're trying to work on other stuff, and like feeling like you're constantly taking one step back for every 2 steps forwards. And like it just feels comfortable. Like it requires like a little bit of foresight and practice and discipline. But then once you get it, you realize, damn, this is actually easier. And then it starts all coming together and it feels good. And so you said this is one of the most, okay, so you said 2 interesting things here. You said this is one of the most detailed digital portraits you've ever made, which that was really exciting. And I think that now that you've opened that door to like, hey, I can turn the detail up way higher than before, I think you could probably double the level of detail on anything that you mean to. If you can reproduce this same thinking, I think that this line actually carries you further than where you are right now. And so I think you've actually like kind of broken a barrier that like I would be really interested to see how far you push it. Maybe not for like these weekly assignments, but like, in whatever. I think that you have the ability to do that now. And
this was a big stepping stone.
Yeah, it'd be exciting to see you do that. The other thing is like, try the soft brush instead of the textured pencil. It's so hard. Like the textured brushes feel like they do a lot of work in very specific scenarios, but boy, using the right tool and the right job sure makes a difference.
Really big difference.
I've been there just grinding away back and forth with like a textured brush, hoping that it was going to do extra work, and all it did was make me grind my hand down, like just spending more time putting more pressure on the stylus, just going back and forth over the same stroke 3-4 times when it only needed to go in once, just because like a lot of these textured brushes, especially ones that are packed in with stuff like Procreate, they're just so bad at like knocking in something when you know where it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
They're kind of greasy almost. Like they take a lot of like repetitions to build up, and when you can kind of get the feeling of, here's the nice sharp version. God, this looks good. Once you can get that feeling of like a nice, confident, painty brushstroke, you just know that when you get it in there, you got it, and you just don't grind yourself down quite so much as with that. And then I feel like you did a really good job achieving the intended goal of the assignment of like having this hierarchy of detail, and I think it looks really cool the way that you kind of capturing the focus of the camera through the level of detail without having to do without doing any kind of post processing.
Yeah.
Like there's no blur filter. I went back in with the blur tool. There's no like I needed to mess around with this. It's like working up through those steps from the loosest and then the tighter parts, the sketchier parts, and then final part, knocking in the detail only where you need it. It's like the work's done. It's just done when you do it that way. And then it's also not overdone. That it's so easy to try to achieve that with every square inch on a painting, and it balloons the amount of time. It makes you second guess yourself. It makes you redo a lot of work, and it's just not fully necessary. And it's like if you can dial that in on other imaginative paintings, you're gonna be enjoying it a lot.
That's the next step, bringing it from a study into like my own work. So that's going to be a big step as well. But being able to try it and test it out here is huge.
Yeah, the whole point of these, like, the people antagonize themselves over like wanting to produce like perfect JPEG to like share with the teacher. The point of this is like cry in the dojo, laugh on the battlefield mentality. Like you need to just do all the failed experiments on quick iterative repetition through studies. That's the whole point of studies. Like no one wants to see our studies. Like there is content out there where people are doing speed paints of their studies, and like I've posted some, but like that's not like why studies are cool or interesting. Like they're a vehicle for us to like push things further. And it's I think you will apply it. And like you're right, there is a challenge to figuring out how does this apply now to like an imaginative process. There's some adaptation that is guaranteed to need to happen to do that. But I think that now that you've like seen it in this environment, I think you're going to be able to carry it forward.
Me too.
Any questions?
Nope.
All right, cool. I was just I felt like you just kind of nailed this one, and your comments made me think like you had some fun breakthroughs this week, so I was like excited to just sort of walk through it with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, awesome. Kim Creed's not here, may not be here today. I'll get to their work last. Sean Gillespie, Sean here? Sean's here. Hey, Sean. What? Sean's got a big paragraph
Hello.
here. How's it going? You said these wrinkles have consumed my life for the last 3 days. You did do this a week and a half ago, but I'm curious to hear what your experience was like overall with this assignment.
Well, I've practiced portraits a lot, but I've never, similar to Amanda, I've never really gone to this level of detail with like skin texture, wrinkles. I've always liked the idea of it, and I've done similar stuff, but I always just kind of relied on texture brushes or whatever to skim over the details. But I wanted to really give it a go, and yeah, I tried to get them all the wrinkles.
All of the wrinkles. Where were you running into trouble?
I think around the edges of the light into shadow.
Mm-hmm.
As it transitions there, as it goes through the like saturated mid-tone into the black, and then the red, trying to get that to work was kind of a struggle. And also just like, because they are so detailed, obviously, it's hard not to get distracted by all the little bits and to try and find, if it's possible, the bigger gesture in the details, if that makes any sense at all.
Yes. So what I'm seeing in your details is I see somebody who is zoomed in to a very close level and working. I mean, about how close do you think you're working? You think it's this close, or do you think it's the one out?
Maybe there, yeah, more or less.
Yeah. And so what I'm seeing is somebody who's in very close for a long time, like long work sessions at this level of zoom. Because I think that the struggle here is it's not in getting this kind of linear, like, pattern of wrinkles necessarily. It's about like, how do we balance that with the overall impression, like the overall like sculpting of the shape from a distance. Like, how do we balance like the zoomed in and zoomed out look at the same time? Because the reason I think that you were zoomed in for a long time without zooming out, getting too much context, is because I see like it looks to me like you've painted over a lot of like your early sketching and looser work, like fully. Like I feel like I'm seeing multiple layers of painting all over this. So
Well,
it's like you've
I
gone and
didn't
repainted.
sketch. I started off black and gray or
Uh-huh.
grayscale, just straight in with paint, basically. So
Okay.
there wasn't a sketch really to go over.
But I feel like I'm seeing like multiple layers of paint, lots of hours of like going over the same areas over and over again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to redo the wrinkles to get them in the right place because I didn't map them out in the first place. So
Yeah, that is tough. And what I'm seeing is this kind of organized repetition. Because you're trying to be very careful about every single one of them, and so you're treating them with this
The
very
same way, yeah.
organized repetition here.
yeah.
And it's like you can see how they're running kind of parallel to each other,
Yeah.
and they are also very evenly spaced. And then I'm gonna
Classic.
do the uncomfortable step of bringing in the reference and see if I can isolate this same sort of space and look at those.
Yeah, there's much more variety there in the shapes of the wrinkles than what I have.
And so what we have, and just to draw it out a little bit, it's like they're not all kind of their spacing is sort of even here, but there's like a real weight.
They're not parallel though, like mine are too parallel.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, the ones in here are running, and then there's like these ones that kind of even run perpendicular almost, and sort of.
Yeah, and I've got some of them in there, but then I tried not to make them too dark. I tried to make them like sub details, but.
And then the other thing about it is that if we were to zoom out a bit, and I'm going to blur the reference just a bit here to try to, or you know what? I'm going to do the high pass. Oh, wait, I'm going to copy, high pass it, invert it, and then overlay it. And that's going to give us a version of the image that is like, has some of that high pass detail removed.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're seeing here is that like larger pattern of value. And even if you're changing the lighting, what I really wanted to show was that like the shape of the face is also quite a bit like more complex than
Mine's a bit too smooth and round, is what you mean.
He's got a fairly simple shape to his face. The geometry of it is running very regular.
Yeah.
Through here.
The roundness in the cheek is too round, too kind of smoothly round.
Yeah, and so it's not like my point that I want to make here is not that you were not careful enough. You were very, very careful. And it's not that you weren't diligent enough, because you were very, very diligent. And so I want to emphasize that the things that you're doing a lot of, it's not that you're not doing them enough and that you haven't gone far enough. The point is that you have skipped an essential element and your process has caused you to accidentally leave something behind that needed to get carried forward with the same level of intensity that you were putting into the kind of, rendering of the wrinkles. And so what I would recommend is that you try to do your best to establish these broader shapes, subtle shapes in the face. You have a great capacity for rendering. When I see your work, I see these really smooth, soft gradients across the form. We can see this across the forehead, where this very soft, progressive, roundness to the overall shape of the head is very elegantly layered underneath the detail. And you have this sense of roundness to a lot of your rendering that I think is very, very appealing. But there is a layer in the middle between this high pass detail and these big round shapes. That's these middle shapes that need to be discovered at some point in the process and then preserved throughout your work detailing it.
Yeah. I think I see what you mean.
Yeah. And so the thing that's missing is not a big reshaping. It's this a couple layers of subtlety of there's places where it feels it's not that the overall lighting needs to change dramatically or that each wrinkle needs to be remapped, but there is I would be going in with a 20-30% brush and trying to create a blurry, smooth, extra layer of rendering that lives between these two layers of detail that brings out the middle-sized shapes without trying to interrupt either the really big stuff that you've established so clearly and the very tiny, tiny details. You've painted in all these individual hairs in the mustache and the beard. So it's definitely not that you're...
I did it hair by hair and the bit under the lip.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I do it too. It's when I want to get when I want to show individual hairs, I draw individual hairs. But it's you have the same thing happening in the mustache. Let's see if we can isolate that reference again really quick. And just bring in the mustache. And we're not going to see it close up. Close up, it's you have drawn individual hairs. You could say, well, maybe the pattern of the hair needs to be different. Maybe I need to work harder on the detail. I don't think that's the point. I think that there is something about the sort of in-between shapes. It's something about it. It's the clumps.
Clumps is exactly what I was just going to say. Yeah, clumps.
It's not the... You found these larger... tufts, right? That are kind of forming, but there's that you've kind of separated them all into their own isolated bits, and there's places here where these tufts are kind of blending into each other in a loose way, in these loose patterns, and so there's all the hairs that you've drawn are all working for you quite well. But there's a wider, looser pattern that is only really visible when you zoom out or blur your eyes. That if you could build that in along with everything else, the detail that you're putting in is going to be more powerful. And so with the same amount of hours spent, the same amount of depth of detail, the same general layout of values, if you can find a place in the process to establish and then protect these more subtle shapes in between them, you're going to get more out of all the things you're already doing right.
Well, I like the way you did it there, just using the low opacity brush to kind of separate one area into its own kind of group
Yeah.
without necessarily bringing it into the shadows. But it's still in the light, but it's slightly darker. It's in its own thing. So yeah, lower the opacity a few times might
Yeah,
help.
and then sometimes you find, okay, well, some of this looks a little bit messy, and maybe, maybe this little edge needs to go away, and then this highlight
Blend
needs
it
to be
back
brought
in,
out a
yeah.
little bit more, and so yeah, you need to paint into it a little bit once you get it there, but to like
Yeah.
bring it back into the painting, I don't think is like a thing that you need to start over to do. So I think it's something that you can like realize you're missing, make a new
Yeah.
layer. Take a stab at it, blur your eyes, zoom out, relax a little bit, walk away from the piece, get a cup of tea, come back. And once you feel like you've got it at that level, then you can zoom back in and start knocking out those really, really fine details and really, really fine brush strokes. And within that greater context, sampling from what's there, then you're going to be able to zoom back out, and that detail is all going to start working for you way stronger.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's really helpful, Pete. Thanks so much.
Great. Well, I aim to be helpful, so I'm way over time today. Thanks so much for doing the assignment.
Thank
It's
you.
great to see your work
See you
as
later.
always.
I'm looking forward to the next one.
Great. Okay. Wagyu. Is Wagyu here? Wagyu's usually here. Wagyu's not here today. Pete for president. All right, fine. I'll do it if I must. What does president get paid? He gets paid something like $70,000 a year, but you're able to do all the government corruption you can handle. All right, so we got Wagyu is usually here, but Wagyu's not here today. So I got two people left. I'm going to go over really quick that I picked out, even because I'm over time, and I just want to talk about their work for a minute, and then we'll go over the assignment for next week. Realize I kind of suck at details. Since I don't have the patience to go over every skin fold and render it, I kind of feel like I failed at the given impression of details as imagined in my head. You know what? I'm confident in you, Wagyu. I think that this is a really strong base, and that all you need to do is zoom in a little bit more. Let's see. Is this one the one where I'm going to talk about this thing? Okay. There is something I do want to talk about when it comes to like details that I've brought up before, but I feel like I should make a video on this particular topic. Wagyu, I think you did a pretty good job with this idea, but I just want to bring this up as a path to like have me feel more detailed without necessarily making smaller and smaller marks. And that's like, how do we refine the detail of the rendering? And I have this trick. It's like, it's not really a trick. It's kind of just a heuristic. And I think about the soft edge and the hard edge, right? So we've got a wrinkle here, and it's very linear. And what I see in a lot of people's work when they're trying to draw wrinkles is that they make the wrinkles, they're all these like linear wiggly lines. And you paint it into them a little bit more, but this whole hard edge, soft edge thing, it works on clouds, it works on skin, it works on just about everything organic. When we have a light source that's coming in from like this direction, what ends up happening is we get an edge that's hard. This is our hard edge. And then we get a soft edge. And that's where we just sort of smush and blend upwards from this side. And every single bit of rendering that you do, if you have an organic thing with a lot of like bumps and lumps in it, you can just there is in this guy's wrinkles, if they're deep enough, they have a little bit of a core shadow to them. But you can just sort of figure out, okay, what direction is the soft edge going to be? What direction is the hard edge going to be? And then it doesn't turn into like 100 hours of rendering. It's a heuristic. It's really easy to just kind of go through quickly. And you can see as it goes across the bottom, it goes to this nice hard edge, and then it softens. And we just have this pattern. It's like a stair step of like going around, and then there's divot, and round, and there's divot. And you can just do this over and over again forever. And you can turn off your brain. It's like super low energy use of your brain. And so if you can find a brush that you just feel like you have a good control over the edges with it, then you go and if once you've established where all the wrinkles are, you are done with all the hard part, all the thinking part, and you can just kind of go through and work your way across that pattern and find where everything is going to either break down to the soft edge or the hard edge. And once you've got a little bit of a model going for it and there's some reference around where you can just stay kind of consistent with it. And as we move across the larger shapes, you're not going to use the same colors over and over again. You're just going to be sampling from like the very local area here. You can see even though I'm doing the same trick here, I'm ending up with different colors because I'm just pulling from the local area. And then if I ever feel like I want more contrast on that edge, I'll pull from outside that local area to like bring in a little highlight, or, you know, if I feel like I want to deepen the wrinkle more, I'll pull in like a shadow color that's a little bit deeper. But you can go through and there's what? On this side of the face, 20 edges. You can bust them out. It's like the detail. I looked through some of my studies and I found that like getting to this point was about 80% of the piece. And then all that stuff you're saying is going to take you forever. That was 20% of the time that I spent on this. So if you can find a brush that works for you in this way, you can go through and just scrub the whole painting. Not even the whole painting. In this case, it's like a third of the painting, right? Because the assignment was to focus on detail over just 1/3. You can go over just 1/3 of the painting and scrub through every edge like that and be like, this is where it's hard, this is where it's soft. Out of a 90-minute study, what's 80% of 90? It's like, 15 minutes. You can bust this out. I guarantee it. 15 minutes, if you get a flow going on it, 15, 20 minutes max, and you can add a crazy amount of detail to your rendering over like an organic area like this. So that's my big tip for you, Wagyu. Push it further. Zoom in. Make a list of what you need to do. Make a plan of how you're going to do it as automatically as possible, and then get it done. And you can absolutely like push that detail level higher. All right, Kincrete. I put your stuff off because I was hoping that I don't want to like skip people and have them show up in the chat. It's happened before. Hi, I'm submitting my assignment. I've always wanted to draw a portrait like this. Today, I only gave myself 1 or 2 days to finish the painting. That's good. Shouldn't be spending 5 days on these. And I ended up being both loved and hated at the same time. I kind of regret focusing too much on the face and forgetting about everything else. I'll pay more attention on the next assignment, I guess. Sorry about my English. Okay, if there's a language barrier, then you don't need to worry. Like the assignment was 1/3 of the painting I want you to do detailed. Forgetting all the other stuff, that's not only correct here, it's correct a lot of the time. This desire to want to do really hard edges and high detail in lots of little background stuff, it's just not always quite the right idea. And I really like the texture of the like lasso fills that you're doing across this guy. I think it looks pretty cool. But the thing I feel like you're missing here is to just bring in a little bit more of that painterly rendering that you're doing like on the nose here. I don't know if you're using a soft brush or using something that just blends nicely like the brown brush that I'm using. But I would love to see more of that on places like, the mustache. One of the things, like the way that it's like, a lot of hairs, a lot of blurry, glancing edges, they're just a lot softer than we anticipate. In digital art, it's really easy to make super, super hard edges. You have like razor hard edges across a lot of this silhouette. And if you can find a way to work into those a little bit, I think that working the silhouette out and working the details out with the lasso tool like this might be a great start. But I think if you want to get a little bit more painterly with it, you're going to have to figure out a way to mush this up a little bit. Find a tool that you feel is comfortable for making some mush happen. I think just when I say tool, I just mean find the right brush, because the brush tool is so good at this. It's so much better and more precise than something like a filter or the smudge tool. And so you can you can start finding where you want to keep those really hard edges and where you want to smush them all out. And that is going to help you establish greater focus. It's going to give you the details that you leave behind so much more impact. It's going to like take all of the value of all the edges that you've already put on the page and just like condense them and like pile all the chips together in one big heap. And together, it's when all the details start like collaborating with each other because there's fewer of them, and it ends up giving a much stronger impact. The amount that you can blur stuff and smush it with a paintbrush is nearly unlimited. You can go and make a smush or a smear that's halfway across the canvas, or you can make it just decide, I just don't want it to be that much, and take it out, maybe soften it just to a halfway finish, a halfway edge. I got to get a good term for that because I use them all the time. There's just a difference between that razor edge and that kind of like smudgy edge of your thumb edge. And those two things, yeah, it's like there's like razor sharp and then there's just kind of firm. And it's like being able to control where you are. If you had to break down your edge density on a scale of like 1 to 10, I mean, do you need to use all 10 of them? Maybe it's just 4 stages, like super hard, there's no edge at all, and then there's 2 in the middle that are like variety of like maybe just a little bit of edge, maybe just, and like being able to like control that across your whole painting, that's a powerful trick to have in your bag. So that's what I was wanting to bring up for your piece. Thanks so much for doing the work, Kimcrete. Your name reminds me of Tekon Kincrete. Excellent animated film. All right, so one more time for everybody who joined us late. This is the assignment piece for this week. It's in the homework channel. I'm going to link the homework channel right now. It's the Pete homework channel. So there isn't a big gimmick to this. I'm giving you a reference image that has a lot of patterned fabric in it. And there's just one pattern, so you don't need to do a billion of them. But my assignment for this week is don't skimp on the pattern. Just don't skimp on it. Try to figure out, how do we paint a pattern on something? You've got a lot of it to deal with. So coming up with a plan of attack that's going to work for you. I don't want to see an overlay. I want to see you paint the pattern somehow. I have a way that I would do it. I personally would paint it as though there is no pattern. Just paint a blank fabric, and then on another layer at the end, paint it all in. But if you want to try to do it with the blending mode, you can do that. If you want to try to slowly start off with splotches of color, then slowly refine them, if that works for you, power to you. I think that sounds crazy, but whatever works for you, give it a shot, see how it goes. We're going to compare notes next week, and I'm excited to see how everybody gets it done in their own way. And we'll see which of these approaches are coming out very easily, which of them are a huge pain in the ass. It's an interesting challenge, and I think it's just one of those things that comes up, pattern fabric. Does anybody have any questions about the assignment or anything else? We're over time, but I'm happy to answer any parting questions before I let you go. You can ask in the chat, you can raise your hand. All right, thank you, Horda. It's been great having you guys, as always. It's good to be back. It feels really good to be here. Oh, we got a raid earlier from Jay Stiller 30. Sorry I missed it. I had a screen over the chat. It's great to see you. We're just signing off. Thanks for the raid party. I don't have any of my tools up to share the raid to another thing. So yeah, Dr. Sensible has a question about the homework here. He says, you don't want us to paint the pattern separately and overlay the fabric. I could say if you want to paint it and overlay it, that's fine. I just don't want you to do a photo overlay. I think that's the thing I'm trying to get across here. Don't try to come up with a way of automating the process where you are just taking a photo and just cutting it out and like laying it on with the blending mode. Yeah, if you're gonna if you want to paint the texture and try to overlay it, like give that a shot. We're gonna look at all the results of the work next week and see whose approaches are producing results that we want to emulate, and which ones are just a huge pain in the ass and a waste of time. And then you're gonna try to warp it. Okay, see how it works. I personally would do it what you would imagine to be the hardest way possible. And my guess is that my method is going to be relatively fast, even though it sounds like the craziest possible way of doing it. Because once you have all of the fabric shape and all the lighting and all the everything established, doing a 2D pattern painted over a half of the image actually is like kind of just zen, and you can just bang it out. Once you got everything else established and there's no question marks around, you can just like make a new layer and just bang it out. It's like, it doesn't take a ton of brain juice to like work your way through it. That's my guess. So we'll see you next week. Thanks everyone again for joining me. I'll see you around. Goodbye. Have a good one.